Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. And tonight let me know, by the way, if you can hear me okay in the chat, please. Tonight we're going to be looking at the NHS Pathways Puberty Blockers trial that I believe should not be happening at all. You can hear me? That's great. Okay. And it's really good to see so much pushback coming from different MPs from across the political spectrum. So we're going to be looking at that. Also from clinicians and various campaigning groups. So what I'm demanding this evening, and I hope that you will join me in doing so, is to demand that Wes Streeting take immediate action to stop the trial before it will cause harm, because we know it will. He knows it will. It is totally unethical. There's also a protest that's going to be happening on the 17th of December. So I will tell you more about that later. And so in this stream, we're going to break down the major flaws of this study, look at how it's repeating mistakes from the past, and ways that if there's any alternatives, and ways that it can be stopped. So buckle up, because it might be a bit of an intense one this evening. And Dusty's just saying there's also going to be a Let Women Speak protest on December the 9th. Dusty, can you pop in the chat where that's going to be happening? Tamsin says, you look a bit more prepared. Yes, I am. Thank you. Earlier on, I was doing a sound check with the mic, and I thought I'd set it to private so nobody could see it. And I was sat here. I hadn't made the bed. I hadn't even got dressed properly or done my hair. But anyways, and then suddenly there's people in the chat going, Meadow, what are you doing? Anyway, so a bit more prepared here this evening. Right. Now, in terms of the trial, it's called Pathways, and even that name to me sounds creepy, because we know that most of these kids who go on the blockers, they then go on to the wrong sex hormones and potentially surgeries. So it's very much part of a medical pathway. So to even call this Pathways, it's like it's all a foregone conclusion, and we'll all just be like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, I've been looking at blockers myself for 5 years now. The first video that I put up was, I think, October or November 2020, and that was the puberty blocker song. Because when I first heard about puberty blockers and what they do, I was just like, what? So I thought I'll do a satirical song about it. Everybody get on the transition train now. Come on, children, get onto the blockers. And earlier this year, I had an interview with James Esses, who's planning legal action together with Kira Bell against this trial, or at least against the decision making about the trial. We had an interview about why the trial should never happen back in March. So that's on YouTube. And in May, I published a global update on how there are about 14 countries around the world, not just in Europe, also Chile, for example, who have either banned or seriously restricted the use of blockers, or urged caution about them. So that was 14 countries. So I put that all together in one video as a news report back in May. So I've linked all those videos that I've just mentioned in the video description. So if you want, you can then check them out after. Okay. So Dusty just said in the chat, the Let Women Speak protest is on the 9th of December at 1 o'clock, probably near King's College. And then there's the other one on the 17th of December. That seems to be more of a joint effort by a coalition of organizations. So LGB Alliance is behind it, GenSpect, the Gay Men's Network, the Women's Rights Network, Julie Bindel, then there's Ellen, loads of people. So we'll get into that a bit more later. Let me just check something here. Yeah, that's all good. Okay, so for me, looking into blockers goes back about 5 years, but there are others who will be looking at it much longer. Transgender Trend, they put up their first blog about this 5 years ago now. They just had their 10th anniversary party. Was it not last week, but the week before. And it was such a good evening because it was such a celebratory moment. They've achieved so much in those 10 years, but obviously they're hoping that they don't have to be around for another 10 years and that we can all just knock this stuff on the head. But here we are. So yeah, they've been at it for 10 years. And then Sue Evans, psychotherapist who worked at JIDS for a short while, she rang the alarm back in 2005. So for Sue, this goes back 2 decades. Can you believe that? 2 decades. And she's been very outspoken and critical about this trial, together with her husband, Marcus Evans, who's also ex-Tavistock. Women Are Real Canada says, hello from the completely captured country of Canada. But even in Canada, things are changing, at least in Alberta. The Premier there is trying to create some quite significant change there. And hopefully that will have an effect on the rest of the country. Right. Okay. So we've got a lot to go through. Thank you all for joining. Before we get into it, one request from me. Stay with me as long as you can this evening, because this is a live stream, and the longer you stay, the more YouTube goes, oh, wow, I'm going to push this out to lots of other people. So that way we can get the story out, get the word out. And because of a conversation of this nature, it seems to be like a sensitive, potentially controversial issue. Once this live stream has ended, then there's a whole bunch of algorithms that will, get their hands on it and might say this is too controversial or too sensitive a topic. You know what? We're not going to push this video out. So let's take advantage of it being live right now. And there's those algos sort of, being in sleep mode. So if you could like the video and then obviously subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment like under the video, not in the chat, but under the video. If you don't know what to say, just say, stop the trial, right? Easy peasy, stop the trial, because that's what we want. And of course, you can support me via Patreon. Links are below the video, or send me some love via PayPal, or on here via Super Thanks. Super Thanks is available. So yeah, that'd be great. Much appreciated. Okie dokie. So let's go. Okay. Just want to make some other things clear from the outset. No child is born in the wrong body. Puberty is not a disease. For most who are experiencing this distress, puberty is the cure. They're trying to block the cure. It's mad. And these are obviously physically healthy children. Peppermint Petty says, it doesn't let me add comments. Okay, I don't know why. Maybe refresh your screen. Right, let's go. So, current situation. Puberty blockers are banned in the UK. What does that mean? The ban applies to the routine prescription of blockers by the NHS. So they stopped doing this just after the interim CAS review report dropped. And also private providers are banned from prescribing blockers in the UK. That ban was first put in place by the then Conservative government. Then Labour won the election and Wes Streeting became Health Secretary. So he extended it twice, and then last December he made it indefinite. But indefinite doesn't mean it's permanent. It just means it's going to be reviewed at some point. And that point could come up quite soon, because he said in Parliament that the earliest date for a review would be 2027, which isn't all that far away. I'll bring that up later. What you mentioned there. I want to kind of stay focused because we've got a lot of stuff to get through. Unless there's a super chat, then straight away I'll be on it. Hint, hint, hint. Okay, so Wes Streeting said in Parliament when he made that ban indefinite that blockers present an unacceptable safety risk. That was a finding from the Commission on Human Medicine. So that's on top of the CAS review concluding that the evidence for blockers is remarkably weak, which we already knew, but at least it was official. So if Wes acknowledges that these drugs present an unacceptable safety risk, how can they suddenly present an acceptable safety risk as part of a trial? But he and others might argue, well, it's because the recruitment criteria is going to be very strict. So, they're not just going to give it out the way they did on a routine basis at JIDS. They'll come up with any argument, right? He also said that it was a scandal that medicine was given to vulnerable young children without proof that it was safe or effective. But in the same speech, he talked about trans children as if it's a thing. And recently he did a keynote speech, I think it was an NHS event, mainly for an audience of, trans allies and advocacy groups. And there he used a lot of the gender lingo, and he even referred to a hypothetical woman who thinks she's a man as a bloke. He didn't even say, trans man. He just went, well, if there was a bloke who, and so I don't know, obviously he's a politician, whether that's just him being a politician and, talking out of both sides of his mouth, or how far he really is captured. What can you say? I don't trust him. And he's a gay man himself. So I would hope that he has a bit of an insight into this whole transing away the gay thing, and that he takes that very serious. I'm not sure if he's ever talked about that or mentioned it, but that's a whole other thing about this trial. How many of these kids would simply grow up to be gay, lesbian, or bi if left alone? And how are they going to screen for that in the recruitment process, which could start? I think now they're saying that it's going to start in January. Anyways, right. So already mentioned that around the world, everything's going to caution when it comes to blockers or restrictions or bans. And there was also a report that dropped 9 days ago in the States. That was from the Department of Health there. And that was more extensive than the CAS review. It involved experts from different fields. So endocrinologists, psychiatrists, bioethicists, philosophers, policy researchers. In other words, a multidisciplinary team, which is something that the CAS review called for. Their conclusions about blockers were that, in essence, it argues that the unnecessary disproportionate risks of harm from blockers and other medical procedures cannot be justified by the very uncertain evidence of benefit, right? So that goes a step further than the CAS review that says there's remarkably weak evidence. The report also focused much more on the harms of the drugs and was very critical of the guidelines, the affirmative guidelines that had been developed by the American Pediatric Association and the Endocrinology Association or Society, whatever it's called, in the States. But as much as things are going in the right direction in quite a few places around the world, the idea of the trans child is so important to the trans lobby. They're not going to let that go, because that's the proof, isn't it, that trans is innate, that it's real, and that all these innocent children are here to show us the way, even though we know these kids, it's not even about these kids. These kids are just being used by adults who've got their own agendas, because it's validating them, and it lets them, unleash their delusions and fetishes onto the world. It's real because look at the trans child. There is another group of people for whom the idea of the trans child is very important, and that's, of course, big pharma, because the sooner you get them on it, the more likely they're to go onto the wrong sex hormones, and then surgeries. Yay! Medical client for life. Client, right? Because this is business. It's not about patients. So they're not going to give up without a fight. And you can already see from Helen Weberly, doing the rounds and launching in the States, they're going to try and milk this as much as they can. And Helen Weberly said in one of her interviews that if they can't use the blockers, they'll find other ways. She just said that. They'll just use other medication to stop the production of sex hormones, because there are alternatives. So we're hardly out of the woods. And then there's a much darker, more sinister side to it. Oh, I don't even want to talk about it because it's so dark. But if you look at, Redux have done great work uncovering this, where they look at the eunuch archives and that group of people and how they fantasize about feminizing young boys with blockers and hormones for their own fantasies. And you may remember Stephen Ireland from Pride in Surrey, who this year was sentenced to, I don't know how many years in prison, 20-something years. And in court, and this hasn't been reported on in the news, but Women of Surrey, they were there every day at the trial, and they heard that he too, with his partners, was fantasizing about putting young boys on these blockers. Yeah, dark. So there's that side too. There are some very sick individuals out there. Anyways, so why is there even a trial? It was one of Cass's recommendations. And one of the arguments that we get now is like, oh, Cass recommended it, therefore we must do it. But I don't think that she actually specified this is the kind of trial we need, and the way that they've gone about it, whether that's in line with what she said. But she would have just generally made a recommendation, because what we need to fill in the gaps in the evidence are particularly the long-term effects. And that's where this trial is not going to do that, but we'll get to that in a bit. There were good things, obviously, about the Cass review. It made it very clear that there was a remarkably, I'm trying to speak too fast. There was a remarkably weak evidence base for the use of blockers for gender dysphoria. Therapy should be the first port of call. It highlighted the many comorbidities that come into play, and that a holistic view should be taken. They should be looked at as children from a holistic psychological perspective, rather than a child with a gender issue. It highlighted the need for evidence about the long-term effects. It talked about the climate of fear among clinicians, that social transition is not a neutral act. And it talked about the social influence of, so many of these youngsters reaching out for a trans identity, if you like. But it also used plenty of gender woo language. And there was even a line in there where it said that for some kids, this is the best possible way forward, which is ridiculous. And then she became a baroness. And in the House of Lords, she did a speech where she was talking about cis people. And I just thought, oh my days. Like, how can you be involved in such a project and still go along with all that stuff? So initially I thought, oh, maybe she's just, again, trying to placate the trans lobby. But I think she generally doesn't get it, right? Because the one thing, and this, I mean, very early on in the report, she said, we're not here to validate or invalidate trans identities. But then if you use the language that supports the very existence of these identities and the treatment for them, then you've picked a side. You can't be neutral in this. So frustrating. Right. Let me just have a look at the chat. Somebody says it was Cass's SOP to the activists. Do you know what? When it's said in the review, because now people are saying that when we complain about, oh, the trial, it needs to stop, then people go, oh, but you said that, Cass was amazing. Just because generally you're happy that at least these things are out in the open and that report was published and that it made such an impact doesn't mean you agree with everything that was in it. And when I read about the recommendation for a trial, I thought that will never get past ethics. That will never get approved. And I thought maybe she just put it in for that reason. So she knew it was never going to go through, but here we are. And apparently one of the reasons for the trial is because when the ban was put in place and it said you can only get the blockers as part of a trial, that kind of put the NHS in a position where it's like, oh, well, then we have to do a trial, because if we don't, then we're basically saying that it's a de facto ban. It's a complete all-out ban. And that's what I think they should have gone for. There's no evidence for it of the benefits. The evidence of the harms is increasing. The questions about the long-term effects are getting more pertinent. So just ban it outright. But obviously they didn't go through that. Sarah says children shouldn't be experimented on. Again, I agree. Oh, and Sarah also says maybe after the live we should be able to comment on the video. Oh, maybe that's because it's a live stream. Yeah. Anyways, so the regulators have now approved the trial. It's taken a while. The trial was they were supposed to start recruiting in January. So I thought they were just going to kick it into the long grass, but here we are. So what are the specifics of the trial? They're looking at recruiting 226 kids, but that's to start with. So who knows? They might just, throw the doors open to more or bring more people on board to deal with more of these kids, because there's plenty of them that are desperate, right? Because there's been the social contagion, there's been the gender grooming in place, and plenty of kids now think that the blockers are the magic bullet. And because the ban was put in place, now they'll be completely distressed and freaked out. And this is the chance to get them. So the ones that they'll attract are the ones that are really gung-ho about must get the blockers, whether it's the child or the parent. They're going to recruit kids as young as 10, right? So right at the start of puberty. So from 10 up to 15. They're going to follow them for 2 years and recruit them over about 3 years, they say. So it's going to go on for about 5 years in total. It's going to be a randomized trial. So out of those 226, the ones who get on it, they won't know at the start whether they'll get the blockers or not right away. So one group is going to get the blockers right away. The other group is going to have to wait a year, and then they'll get on the blockers. To me, there's ethical issues with that. I mean, getting the whole thing started, obviously, but even if it starts, that they're going to split them out that way, because all these kids are going to be just as desperate. So the ones that are on it, that'll seem really unfair to the ones who aren't on it, right? And for them, I think whatever distress they're feeling is just going to get worse. So then once they get on it after a year, they'll be like, oh, thank God. Because in that year, they will have seen their body develop. Now, hopefully that, could also work out the other way, that they start to accept themselves because there's therapy alongside it. But if you're so determined to get them, then is there, and you're being promised them, right? There's that stick with a carrot that says, just 1 year, just 1 year, just wait 1 year. How likely is it that they're going to change their mind, especially if they've already socially transitioned? The whole thing is mad. And this will make you happy to know that you're paying your taxes. This is all costing almost 11 million pounds, right? It's 10.7 million pounds. And that's our money. That's you and me. That's our tax money that's going this. We're paying for the sterilization of children, basically. So, and I don't know if that's what Wes wants to be his, what you call it, legacy, Streeting the sterilizer. Right. So, cup of tea. How are you guys doing in the chat? Helen says, if only Tavistock kept proper records, there would be no need for further research. Well, and we've already got the research from the Tavistock. But we'll get to all that. Right. So, lovely. Right. So the harms of blockers, what do we know? We know that they cause infertility if you then go from blockers onto the cross-sex hormones, and 95 to 98% goes down that path. So that's infertility. Lack of sexual function. The earlier you go on them, obviously, the less your reproductive system has a chance to develop, and therefore you might never know what it's like. You might, like Jez Jennings, right? He now identifies as asexual, I think. He'll never know what it's like to be intimate with someone in that way, and to experience that type of bonding with someone, or even just on your own, to be able to, and enjoy your body, so to speak. And even Earth Not Safe says, hi, Menno, good evening. Dusty says, most shocking thing is that they affect IQ. We'll get to that in a bit. Mima Tak says, ik ben laat. Sorry, evening everyone. That means I'm late. No worries. So even Marcy Bowers, the president of WPATH, he's on camera saying that all these kids who go on the blockers at stage 2, they're all anorgasmic. And he called that a red flag. So if even he calls that a red flag, that's quite serious. These are the people, pushing all these treatments. And his suggestion was that rather than putting kids on the blockers at tenor stage 2, maybe you hold off for a bit, you give them a bit of time to go through puberty, just a bit, enough for their reproductive system to kick in, so that they may have that function in life as adults. That's also like, and how can a child consent to this? We'll get to consent in a bit, but and somebody said they could research all previous Tavistock kids and check if they are happy or not. Yes, again, I'll get to that in a bit, because there's also some limitations with that. Right, other harms, other risk. Oh, roly-poly, thank you so much for your £4.99. What times we live in, indeed. And that you have to explain all this stuff over and over and over again. I'm just going to respond to this. Thank you. Right, that's my pizza sorted for after. Harms of blockers. So infertility, lack of sexual function, decreased bone density, and then there's disrupted brain development. And this is something that was pointed out at that High Court case when Kira Bell and Mrs. A took the Tavistock to the High Court. There was some kind of research body, I can't remember the name of it now, but they said that they were worried that actually the blockers lock a child into their distress. And that's been acknowledged by others as well since. So if you lock a child into that distress, you're stopping them from growing out of it. You know, they literally cannot grow out of it, which is mad. It's like you're blocking the cure. You're blocking the cure and then putting them on blockers, which exacerbate the problem. I mean, you don't need to be a medic to understand this, do you? I want to read out your username, but it sounds rude, and YouTube might think that I'm being rude. So I'll just start with the first word of your username. English says, "Don't forget that the NHS is balls deep in activists. They will infiltrate and try to control the trial, just like Tavistock." I agree. They're in too deep. Right, and a pretty simple principle. If you suspect there's going to be cognitive damage, don't do it. Like, what are you going to do after the study is done? Oh yeah, for those kids, they've got cognitive damage now, or brain damage, or we've stunted their brain development. Yeah, okay, so we've done that for, I don't know, 100 of them. At least we know now. Because that's what the trial is saying. It's saying we're expecting damage. We just need to record it. How is that ethical? Especially when the benefits aren't proven. And how can the risks ever outweigh the benefits? And Stella O'Malley, she wrote a piece in Spiked Online. She compared it to a bridge, that there was a bridge that was too dangerous to cross. So they said to everyone, it's forbidden to cross this bridge. And they cordoned it off. You know, don't cross. And now they're saying, oh, but these children, they can cross it. We just need to see what happens when they try to cross it. It's so dark. Okay, so what is wrong with the trial? Obviously, I've gone into that quite a bit already. But the key thing for me is, like the CAST review, it doesn't address the root of the issue, that there is no such thing as wrong puberty, that there's no such thing as gender identity, you know, or the idea of aligning your body with your gender. You know, it's bonkers. This, it's a social contagion, and it's ideological. Also, the idea of changing your body or putting your body on pause, so to speak, so you can decide what you want to be, as if that's a choice. It's not. There's certain things in life that you don't get to choose. It completely goes against the idea of the trans movement arguments, right? All their key arguments that, you know, gender is a spectrum and sex is a social construct, like some evil, bigoted, colonialist construct. And yet here they are calling for kids to be put on a potentially sterilizing pathway to prove that trans is real, right? It makes no sense, because if they truly believe that, then why do kids need to have their bodies changed? Why do you need to change your body to fit with a certain idea if the idea is so supposedly bad, evil, bigoted, narrow-minded, right? It doesn't make any sense. This is all about adults wanting to use kids so they can, as I said earlier, unleash their delusions and fetishes onto the world. Another key thing is that typically we talk about gender dysphoria, which that's a whole other video, and Amy Souza and Dr. P on X, they both write a lot about how this is a completely bonkers diagnosis and classification in the first place, because it relies on stereotypes. But at least that's what they, gender dysphoria is more serious, because for this trial, they're not looking at that. They're looking at gender incongruence, which means you just have to feel unaligned somehow with your body, but you don't have to be distressed about it, right? They're not looking for distress. At the same time, we're being told that if they don't get the treatment, and that is life-saving treatment, if they don't get the treatment, they're more at risk of, I don't want to use the words because, again, YouTube will slap me on the wrist. But how can you claim that it doesn't cause you distress, yet if you wouldn't get the medication, then you would go to those lengths? None of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. Like, there's nothing wrong with their bodies. There's nothing. Hi, Taylor. There's nothing wrong with their bodies. And if they have incongruence and not dysphoria, then there's nothing wrong with their, in terms of they don't have experienced psychological distress. So there's no physical issues. There's no psychological distress. So why do you need medication? Like, why? It makes no sense. Because if nothing's urgent, is it? And then if you want the medication, then it's much more about want. It's desire. There's no medical need. There's no clinical need. There's no psychological need, right? Because there's no distress. So why throw 10.7 million at it? So I think that for me is a red flag, the fact that they're using incongruence as a criteria, because that really lowers the bar. And maybe that's just a way to say, again, to widen the net and get more on board once the studies, the trial gets going. Pie Packet, thank you so much for your £2. Thank you. Okie dokie. So the other thing that doesn't make any sense is, as I mentioned earlier, the randomization. So one half of the group gets the blockers right away, and they'll have been desperate for that for a while. The other group is told, yeah, you have to wait for a year, right? Rolly Pony says now he'll get stuffed crust. Right, okie dokie. I mean, the trial by nature is going to attract the most desperate ones, even though they don't have to be desperate to go on the trial, right? Because it's incongruence. So half of them will have to wait a year, which I think will just make things worse for them. And they'll think it's just a lottery and it's unfair. Now, it reminds me of a study that Johanna Olsen Kennedy did at the LA Children's Hospital. She's that woman, she's a complete nutcase. Like, you've got Helen Webley, then you've got the Teats woman, what's it, Scythe Gallagher, and then you've got Johanna Olsen Kennedy. Like, also Johanna Olsen Kennedy is married to a woman who thinks she's a man, who promoted a crowdfunder for a double mastectomy for a Down syndrome child who was nonverbal. Like, these people, like, nothing stops them. Nothing will stop them. So she did a study about gender affirming double mastectomies for minors as young as 12 and younger adolescents. And she compared two groups. So all girls, and one group of girls, they got their double mastectomies. The other group of girls didn't. And then she's like, oh, which one feels better about themselves? So, duh, of course, it was going to be the ones who'd had their mastectomies because they're still in the honeymoon phase of the surgery. Maybe they're on testosterone and they're feeling great about themselves because, hurrah, the breasts are gone. The other group are like, oh my God, I've still got them. When are you going to take them? And then she's like, oh, well, that's interesting. That group says they're happier. It's like, I mean, we can all see what's going on there, right? And then she used that study to argue that, oh, gender affirming double mastectomies are just like a necessity. Yeah, we should do it. And we should take it on a case by case basis, right? Don't look at minimum age. No. Case by case. Again, they're just absolute ghouls. What is the price? Jai hi, G hi, D30, Mr. Meadow. Hi. Right. Also, and here, this is one of the main things, I guess. The study is going to follow them for 2 years. So the key thing that we need to find in terms of evidence is about the long-term effects. And here they are following them for 2 years. Like, how is that going to help get the evidence that we need? It won't. Oh, it's also at that point, like, these kids are probably still in the honeymoon phase of all of this. It's like, oh, thank God my puberty hasn't kicked in. Or, all these boys, oh, I haven't got that deep voice. I haven't got my Adam's apple. Hurrah. What can you say? Oh, Natalie Harris, thank you so much for your £20. That's much appreciated. Let me just say thank you in the chat. Thank you for your £20. Rowdy Polly says, oh, garlic bread, chicken wings, and a beer. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Actually, I'm going to make waffles. I got myself a waffle maker. It was a, Black Friday sale. I've been making waffles. I got so much waffle batter in the fridge. So sweet waffles, great. And what did I make the other day? Potato waffles. So potato, onion, fresh parsley, fresh chives, fresh dill. They were so good. Anyways, let's go back to the more depressing stuff. Taylor says, I'm actually so angry and upset about this, I can't even put it into words. I'm running out of words because, like, how many times can you say it's nuts and unethical? Right, where was I? Okay, the duration. So yeah, what are the chances, right? So imagine they get a 10-year-old girl. She goes on it right away. Then she's 12. Her period hasn't kicked in. Her breasts haven't started growing. Obviously, that's what she wants. But on blocker, she's still clearly female. So what is she going to say when she fills out the survey at the end, right? So she just has to fill out a survey. Oh, are you happier now? She's going to be like, well, yeah, but she'll just want to go on to the testosterone. And this is something that Kira Bell pointed out. When she was on the blockers, it actually made her feel, she got menopausal symptoms. And also she said, she called it brain fog. So she couldn't wait to go onto the testosterone to stop the effects of the blockers. So, the whole thing's just so messed up. What they need to stop doing is buying into this idea that they need to change their bodies and that there is a silver bullet in terms of, what they call gender affirming medicine, which I think is medical malpractice. That is the thing, because that's what they've got their mind set on. So what are the chances that they'll desist when they would have worked really hard to get on the trial? Then you're on the trial. They would have been socially transitioned in the first place. So how likely is it that they'll desist once they're on that trial, even if they have to wait for a year? Right. And even on the recruitment form, apparently it says, it asks them if they identify as, you know, trans, non-binary, but also two-spirit. I wonder if it has cloud gender or sparkle gender or blender gender on the form. Okay. Other big issue is consent. That's a massive one. So, how can a child consent to things that it cannot conceive? Like, again, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that that's a ridiculous thing to expect. How can you expect, say, an 11-year-old boy to consent to a lifetime of dilation? It is so beyond crazy. Helen says blender gender, ha ha ha. Do you know what? This is actually a gender that was named in Parliament in Ireland, right? There was that senator who wanted to show how crazy all of this is. And so she listed, because they were talking about some hate speech bill in Ireland. And so she was saying, well, can we define gender? Can we talk about what it is, you know, if you're hateful about someone's gender identity? And she had a whole list of, yes, Senator Keegan, is that how you say it? She read out this whole list and others were trying to stop her. She's like, no, I'm finishing this list. I think it took her over 22 minutes or something just to go through the list. And one was sparkle gender, and there was gender and blender gender and ghost gender and Sagittarius gender, all these gender things. Yeah. I wonder how, you know, it just opens the doorway to all these wonderful treatments. Maybe I can have some hormone injections so that, or not hormone injections, glitter injections, so that I'm naturally luminescent. Is that how you say it? Like those stupid vampires in the Twilight Saga when they sparkle in the sun. For my sparkle gender. Right. But we know that this is all rubbish. And even WPath acknowledged it, or members of WPath. There was that leaked Zoom call or video call where a bunch of them were talking about consent, and several of them acknowledged that that children don't know what they're talking about because they can't conceive it, because they're looking at things with a child's mind, and that even the parents can't consent to it. And that one of the members was talking to a parent and to a child about fertility options, and they both just looked at him like, eh, and he said it was like talking to a blank wall. And that was an endocrinologist, a doctor called Daniel Metzger, Canadian, and he said, here's the quote, "It's always a good theory that you talk about fertility preservation with a 14-year-old, but I know I'm talking to a blank wall." And yet they go ahead with it. And why do they talk about fertility options? Because these treatments will render them sterile. You know, on the trans side, they're always like, no, it's completely reversible. No, they don't end up sterile. What are you talking about? That's what the Mr. Endocrinologist himself says. It's like, but again, fertility is a whole other industry in itself. You know, this is because obviously all this gender affirming stuff is a big business, but there are so many other things that are connected to it, like fertility preservation. That is a good cup of tea. Right, there is a question in the chat by Crispis. What is bro talking about? I'm not being rude. I'm just asking genuinely. Well, if you've just joined, I'm talking about the NHS Puberty Blockers Trial. It's called Pathways. Let me know in the chat if you know anything about puberty blockers or not. Otherwise, I don't really know quite where to start answering your question. But that's a drug that stops puberty for kids who are distressed, like boys who think they're girls, girls who think they're boys. Oh, Chris Piz just posted a trans flag, one of those. Okay, well, let's see what else he comes up with. I do have a put user in timeout button. So, Epic Mouse says, hello, hi. Okay, let's go on. Also, okay, so I mentioned this case before, the High Court judicial review brought by Kira Bell and Mrs. A versus the Tavistock, where initially they won, and the judge ruled that for children 14 to 15 years old, it is doubtful that they can consent. And for children 13 and under, it's highly unlikely that they can even consent to these medical interventions. That ruling was overturned, and it was said, okay, well, it's basically up to the clinicians to decide, which also puts the responsibility right there with the clinicians, in the clinicians' hands. So I don't know if there's any insurance involved in this trial and how they're thinking they're going to, cover for any potential lawsuits. Oh, Patty, thank you so much for your £20. Wow, I'm going to go crazy this evening for dinner. Actually, no, again, I'll use that for my trip to Glasgow. I'm off to Glasgow on Tuesday to interview a gay male detransitioner. I'll be interviewing him on the Wednesday. So I'll put this towards travel. I've got my flight covered now, but I'll put that towards trains and maybe taxis if I need to get one. And a sandwich on the way. So, okay, consent. There's also the issue of the parents leading the child. The Transhausen by proxy people. So how will the researchers, how will the recruiters be able to detect or pick that up and prevent such a child from being put on these drugs? There have been cases in the family court where a judge decided that a child should not be put on either blockers or wrong sex hormones, and where the influence of a parent was noted as being the driving force behind it, not so much the child itself. Only one parent needs to consent. So I don't know what that means if there's two parents and one wants it, but the other is dead set against it. I don't know. There was a case where a mom, there was a 15-year-old, I don't know if it was a boy or a girl, and the dad was like, the parents had separated, and the dad's like, yes, put my child on the blockers. This is when the NHS had already stopped the routine prescribing of blockers. So the dad wanted to go private, and the mom's like, hell no, it needs to go via the NHS psychotherapy first. So they couldn't work it out, went to court. The judge sided with the mum in that case, because in this case it was a Transhausen dad, and the judge said no gender affirming care interventions. I don't want to use the word care until the child is 16. So don't know what happened after that. But the question I have is, what kind of parent even wants their child to be on this trial, right? If there's 226 kids, there's at least 226 parents, right? Unless there's one parent with 3 trans kids, which is not unusual these days. These parents will either have been misled, up the gender garden path, or be at their wits' end with their child's distress, even though distress isn't needed, because only incongruence is needed for the trial. Oh, man. Like, these recruiters have their work cut out. I don't know how they're going to try to detect all these things. And especially if there's so many of them knocking on the door saying, let me on the trial. I'm afraid a similar thing is going to happen. That happened at Tavistock, where they just, put these kids on the drugs because they just had to get through the workload. There were so many, the waiting list was so long that they're hardly going to give them extensive, even though they'll say they will, extensive therapy or exploratory sessions to figure out what the hell is even going on. What about autism? Autistic kids can go on the trial too. The trial is inclusive of kids on the autism spectrum. Again, they say that, we'll have careful discussions with the child and parents, and but there you go. And this is where I think, when it comes to really understanding a child, it takes a long time. It takes many, many sessions. You're not just going to figure out what this child is struggling with and what's really underpinning their idea that they're in the wrong body or that they want to be the other sex. That's going to take years. That could take years in itself, just figuring that out. So they're not going to take all that time. They're going to put these kids on without having that in-depth knowledge. I mean, that's just how therapy works. It takes a long time. It takes time to establish a rapport with your therapist, to trust them, to stop playing games. And kids are clever that way. And they're all, we know this, they're all online telling each other what to say and how to answer questions so they can get the drugs. Oh, man. And for autistic kids or kids on the spectrum, it is a very wide spectrum. And I spoke to Janie from Evidence-Based Autism at the Transgender Trend Party, and she told me she's autistic herself, and she told me about issues that are specific to those on the autism spectrum. One of them is something called interoception. And that's basically, can you read your body signals? Like, are you hungry? Are you tired? Are you thirsty? That kind of stuff. Are you stressed? Which some on the spectrum have difficulty with. They don't understand the signals that their bodies are giving them. The other thing is alexithymia. Oh, the only way to remember that name is to think, Alexa. I don't have an Alexa in my room, so I can say that. Alexithymia. So whereas interoception is about the physical, reading the physical signals and understanding them, alexithymia is about your emotions. Do you understand your emotions? Can you sort of pinpoint this emotion is this and the other one is that? And can you articulate these things? That's not something that is easy for someone on the spectrum. And again, they're saying, we'll have lots of sessions. I just don't think that it's going to be enough to really get a good, clear idea of what's going on. Then the other big thing is, Tamsin just said, you triggered my Alexa. All right, Alexa, stop. The other one is, obviously, same-sex attraction is a big one. That's one that I'm particularly worried about. And homophobia, internalized homophobia, that's driving these kids to want to not be themselves and to, in fact, be the opposite sex. I've had a look at the inclusion and exclusion criteria of the Pathways trial. It doesn't explicitly mention internalized homophobia, and that could play a role. And again, if you're there with a 12, 13-year-old, they're not going to say, well, actually, I'm dealing with internalized homophobia, because they don't even, like, when I was that age, I was terrified of being gay or the idea of being gay. I didn't get comfortable with that until I was 20, 21. That took me a long time, right? And others, that's the other thing about being on the spectrum. If you're on the autism spectrum, they tend to develop and mature a bit slower than others. So if someone's 10 or 11 and they're on the autism spectrum, depending on where they are on that spectrum, they might well have the emotional maturity of a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old. So these recruiters are just going to have to be hyper aware of all these factors that can come into it, while having plenty of kids who want to go on this, and they can only say yes to 226. And who are these people that are doing the recruitment? Are they actually, have they worked for GIDS maybe before, or are they affirmative? Where do they stand on these things? It's just, the whole thing's just like a nightmare. Right. And then as part of the evaluation, apparently one of the main things is a survey. And they're going to ask them, are you happy? Are you happier now? Like, what's that going to tell us? They're also going to scan the brains. I don't know too much about what they're going to scan or how they're going to scan that. So if anyone in the chat knows about that, then do let me know. I don't know what areas of the brain they're going to scan and how they're going to measure the impact of the drugs on the brains. But and what happens after? What happens after the trial? Do these kids just stay on them? Because then suddenly they can say, oh, we're justifying giving them more blockers because they've been on them, and now there's a clinical need to keep them on them, right? And the ones who are, say, about to hit 16, are they going to go onto wrong sex hormones? Anyways, let's move on to the next bit, why we don't need one. Okay, Dr. P on Twitter, she's a clinician with 30 years experience, says, there is no need to do a clinical trial because no one is born in the wrong body. Duh. Like, we should just need to keep going back to that, just to common sense. The other one is, we already have studies, enough studies to put 2 and 2 together, and 2 and 2 is 4, not 5. So there's the 2011 study from the Amsterdam Gender Clinic that pioneered the Dutch protocol. I'm so embarrassed to be Dutch when I talk about the Dutch protocol. I'm like, we have much better exports than that. I promise. We have amazing cake. Doesn't really make up for it, does it? I've just been baking cake all week, like traditional Dutch cakes with clove and cinnamon and cardamom, and oh, it smells so good, it tastes so good. Right, I digress. So there's the Amsterdam study that was done with 70 adolescents, 34 male, 36 female. According to the conclusions, they showed improvements in psychological functioning and gender dysphoria resolved after surgery, right? So they weren't just testing blockers, they were testing, this was the whole medical pathway, right? Blockers, wrong sex hormones, surgery. What they didn't mention was that one of them died as a result of having been on the blockers, a direct result of that. So this was a guy who, because he'd been on the blockers, his bits down there never developed. So there wasn't enough tissue to work with. When they went for the Todgerin version, surgery. So they then took a part of his colon, as you do. That got infected. He got necrosis. And he died. Had he not been on the blockers, he may have grown out of his distress. Pardon me. Had he not been on the blockers, there would have been more material to work with. And he may be alive. That's 1 out of 70. That's a high percentage. Charles says this sick experiment is simply to mollify the TRA extremists. It's political, not scientific. We must fight it by any means necessary. Well, Charles, if you can make it on the 17th. Charles is coming, has been to loads of protests. Very dedicated. So, okay, that was the Dutch study. That was the study that Tavistock JIDS then tried to replicate. So, but the Tavistock JIDS study wasn't published until February 2021, right? They kept not publishing it. They only published it after the Kira Bell and Mrs. A versus Tavistock High Court case. That was a study with 44 minors. And once the findings were published, it was published in kind of like a positive way, but it was quite misleading. So there's been a re-evaluation. Dusty Masterson says Michael Biggs forced them to publish it. Michael Biggs has been absolutely amazing in this, highlighting all the wrongs of the various studies, the flaws, and how data gets misrepresented. He's been absolutely fantastic, and he's written some really good papers also on how they started placing men in women's prisons. He's done amazing work. He was at the Transgender Trend Party as well. That evening was just incredible because you had all these people in the room, or most of them, who'd been ringing the alarm about this, you know, from the early days. So where are we? Because we've been talking for an hour. Oh my God. Right. So what is left to do? I'm going to talk about why we don't need one, what the alternatives are, can it be stopped, who is pushing back, action steps, right? So we've got a few sections to go through, and then we'll wrap it up. So, right, so we've got the studies from the Amsterdam Clinic. We've got the Tavistock JIDS, that's called the Early Intervention Study. Earth Not Safe says, is anyone getting ads during this live? Yes, you may get some ads. That's just to help me do my shopping, basically. Be able to go to Sainsbury's. So do watch the adverts, please. Because the longer you watch, you know, that's how I get advertising revenue, basically. Oh my days. I don't know how to pronounce this name. Jihai. It says, I would literally lose my job if I spoke out about this. Isn't that crazy? That's still in 2025. That's where we are today. And Okie Stick Wheel Fly Hydra. You need to come up with some usernames that roll off the tongue a bit nicer, guys. Says, hey, late start, but glad I caught the live. Thank you very much for joining me. Nice to have you here. And T-Bay says, your room looks tidier than earlier today. Yes. And I do too. Okay. Right. Okay, doke. So, studies. So the early intervention study basically could not replicate the findings of the Amsterdam Gender Clinic study. And the same thing happened in Finland. They could not replicate those findings, and they noticed that the cohort had changed. It was much more girls that wanted to go down that path and become boys. So intervention study outcomes, 34% actually got worse. 37%, 37%, there was no significant change. For 29%, there was so-called reliable improvement. So 71% either stayed the same or got worse. That's not a good finding. That's terrible. Very important finding was that 98% of them, so everyone bar one, went onto the wrong sex hormones. And that's when, again, it was confirmed that this is not a pause button. This is an entry point to a radical medical pathway, which is based around living your life around being something that you're not. It's the opposite of authentic self. And this year, we had the Supreme Court ruling that says that for the purposes of the Equality Act, a man is a man, a woman is a woman, sex means sex, not something on a certificate. So you can put a child on this. You can put a child on this, on the blockers, on wrong sex hormones, then amputate body parts. But in the eyes of the law, they're still their original sex. So what even is the point, apart from making money and pushing an agenda? Somebody asked, why so many young girls and older men? And Charles says, the girls want to escape sexual objectification. The old men are pervs and want to wallow in it. This is so true. We see this time and time again. And it's so twisted. And we've seen so many of these men who think they're women openly talk about it. They write books about it, like Andre Alon Chu in his book Females. Like, they revel in it because they want to be objectified, and the girls are like, no, I don't want to be objectified. I mean, that's just a bit simplified, but it shows there's a very stark difference in terms of motivations. So, alternatives. Okay, so some people say that through Tavistock JIDS, 9,000 kids were seen, and about 2,000 of them were put on the blockers. Can't we just check up on them? These could be followed up for more long-term data, yes, but most of them will already have been on wrong sex hormones and have had surgeries. So they're not all starting from the same position, and that's why this trial needs everyone to start at the same, what they call the baseline. They all need to be at the same starting position. Otherwise, the data won't mean anything. But still, if they had 10.7 million to spend on it, they could have spent that on a different study to specifically follow them and take into account all the different steps of their, medical interventions and how that impacted on them, if they're doing well in life or how they felt things affected them at the time, blah, blah, blah. Surely you could design a study around that. And also that was another recommendation by the KES review, is to have a linkage study, right, to follow up with those, but the gender clinics don't want to give the information out. Funny that. Still, there's around 100 kids that are currently on the blockers through the NHS because they were on blockers before they stopped prescribing them on a routine basis. So they're still on them, They didn't say to them, oh, you can't have it anymore. They're still on them, even though it's not safe, considered not to be safe at all, but they're still on them. Question in the chat. Hi, Menno. I heard BlackRock is dumping money into the trend stuff. I don't know the ins and outs about that. Check out Jennifer Bilek. Her blog is called The 11th Hour, and I'm sure that she's written about that. Sarah with a H says, girls don't want to be treated like women. Women face a lot of unwanted attention, and girls witness this and experience it too. And at the same time, you've got all these blokes, especially on Twitter, going, oh, look, I'm a lady. Look at me in my skimpy little outfits. Right, so these 100 kids that are currently on the blocker, see, to me, that seems the most obvious cohort that they, again, could go to, especially if they haven't gone on to cross-sex hormones yet, so wrong sex hormones. That's a ready-made cohort. Again, not the same baseline, but surely they could design something around that to get valuable insights from them. Denise says, evening all, hello. Oki says, as a teenager, I would have fallen into that trap. I had a shaved head, wore boys' clothes. I'm way more feminine now as a 43-year-old woman, still a bit of a tomboy. And isn't that just beautiful? like that you have a chance to grow into yourself. And so many things as adults take time in terms of growing into ourselves, getting comfortable with ourselves. Sometimes it doesn't come until you're into your 40s that you get a good grip on all these things. And that's why my advice is always give yourself time, not just a week, not a month, not a year, give yourself a lifetime. Okie doke. So another thing I thought that they could have done was an alternative trial where they trial different therapeutic approaches, because how great would that be, right? Okay, these kids are distressed. Let's try therapy. That was also a recommendation from the CAS review. That should be the first port of call. Okay, well, we've got different types. Let's see which one is the most effective. Duh. But that takes time. That might take 3, 4, I don't know, years. But surely that would be so worth it. But that wouldn't lead anyone down the medical path. So there's not much of a profit motive there. And obviously that won't give us any information on how these drugs affect them. But do we really need to know how bad it's going to get? Like, surely it's plain to see that it's ethically wrong to induce physical harms to a healthy body, especially one that's going through one of the most natural things in life, the most important developmental stages you need to go through in life, which is puberty, not just for your reproductive system and the secondary sex characteristics, but for the brain. It's such an important time for the brain. There's a neuro, I think, I don't know what the full name is. Let's look it up. I can look it up. A neuro, her name is Sally Baxendale. She's done work on this. A neuropsychologist, right? So she's done a lot of talks about specifically how blockers impact the brain. So check her out. And she's done some talks for Gen Spect as well, I think. And they've already, like, the other thing is test it on animals. That's a whole other can of worms, but they've already done tests on sheep and the outcomes were not good, right? The brains didn't develop fully and they never caught up, those sheep, and they became anxious and they couldn't solve problems. That's all about the executive function of the brain that you're stunting and damaging. So all that is already telling us this whole trial is a bad idea. How can it be stopped? Well, James, Esses, and Kira Bell, they're going for the legal route. I don't know if that's good. I don't think that's actually going to stop the trial, because they'll go to court to argue how a decision was made. That is what the High Court does. So it's not going to stop the trial anyway. But the more pressure we can put on them, Oki says, wow, on animals, yes. Yeah, there was a study on sheep. It's been done years ago. And I think there was a guy, maybe the same guy, he tried to do another study with sheep and it was rejected on ethical grounds. Can you believe that? So Dusty says, I presume James and Kira will seek an interim injunction to stop the trial. I don't know enough about the legal system to know if that's what they would go for and if they would get that. Cases at the High Court are very hard to argue because it's all about decisions and has the right process been followed to arrive at a certain decision. It wouldn't be about the trial itself, whether it's right or wrong. It's all about how the decision was made. So that's a whole other legal minefield. There are petitions going around. Citizen Go has a petition up at the moment, and also a crowdfunder for Kira and James, Kira Bell and James Esses. One thing I think, and this is giving me hope, and I hope you too, is the level of pushback. right? Because and it shows how far we've come over the last couple of years in terms of how many people are speaking up, how many organizations have set up that are pushing back, and the whole network that's been established, and that we now have the ear of people in government. So, for example, Grumpy says, here's £20. Thank you so much. Let me just give that a heart or a like. Oh, I can't do that on here. It doesn't pop up as an option. Thank you so much, Grumpy. I hope this chat hasn't made you more grumpy. And also, oh, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. Denise, thank you so much for your £5. So Grumpy, thank you so much for your £20. Very generous. Thank you very much. And Denise, thank you so much for your £5. And you say, P.S. I'm not a stalker. Okay, is that you outside my window now? You're doing this from your phone as you're standing outside. Let me just say thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate those super chats, people. Okay, I think we're nearly there. Oh my God, he's been talking for an hour, 20 minutes. But see, there's so much to say about this. I'm just going through the basics, right? And there's a lot more. There's so much that I haven't even touched on. So who's pushing back? Sue and Marcus Evans. They were at the Tavistock previously. Marcus longer than Sue. Also, what's his name? Dr. David Bell. He was also ex-Tavistock. He wrote a piece about months ago how about this should not be happening at all. Kemi Badenoch, leader of the opposition, a leader of the Conservative Party, she wrote a letter to Wes just saying, what the hell? And then Wes kind of responded, I'm very surprised by your reaction, but I'll write back. Rebecca Paul, Conservative MP, she's been speaking out about this in Parliament, and she's written a letter about it with all the questions. Because there's a lot of mystery around this trial. There's a lot of questions that aren't being answered, and they're withholding information. So it just looks and sounds dodgy. Jonathan Hinder, he's a Labour MP who's very vocal about being opposed to this. And then we have Rosie Duffield, used to be Labour, now Independent. And Rupert Lowe, Independent at the moment, used to be with Reform. So from Reform to Tories to Labour and to Independents, this is really good because it shows that this is no longer just a siloed issue. Although it's, well, at least it's becoming more of a cross-party issue. And that's good because we need to get out of the right wing nonsense. So they're stepping up, and these organizations that are organizing the protests. So action plan. Dusty, it was the 9th of December, right? So that's a protest organized by Let Women Speak. So follow Let Women Speak on X and on Instagram and TikTok and everywhere where they are. Oh, Taylor just said, if the trial is starting in February, they've done that on purpose so we don't have time to object in court or any other arena. Okay. I just want to check up with a few other things in the chat. Oh, Dusty is saying, I think an injunction would be required because a judicial review could take 2 years, by which time the trial is finished. Basically, well, it could go on for 5 years, depending when they recruit everyone. But yeah, for 2 years, they may be at the end of it already. Denise Smith says she ripped Rachel from accounts to bits. What is that about? Rachel from accounts? Okay, I'm not going to scroll up because I won't be able to catch up. But and English says mainstream media needs to be more honest about this too. We do see more about this in the media now, though, than we see 5 years ago, I think. Okay. And Taylor says, write to all your MPs. I think somebody had a ready-made letter that could be sent to MPs that may even have been Rupert Lowe, but that's one thing worth checking out. Right, so protest, one on the 9th of December and another on the 17th of December. I have a feeling that the one on the 17th might be a big one. like, because there's so many different organizations involved in putting it together. I also think that we're going to see a counter protest, because on the trans side, they're not happy with the trial, because they're like, how dare you put half of the kids on the drugs and the other half you don't? And they always play the suicide. Oops, I said the word. Okay, YouTube's going to slap me down for that. They're going to play that card, even though that's been debunked by various studies now. Like there was a Finnish study that said, no, it doesn't reduce it if they go on these drugs. The Lewis, oh, what's his name? Lewis something, the expert in the UK. Louis. Let me just look that up. I don't like having unfinished stuff. Expert. Appleby. There he is, Louis Appleby. He also looked at Tavistock data, and he debunked that if you don't get it, that things get worse that way. No, that's not happening. So that's all. But, you know, those are the cards that they'll play. They may even stage one of those theatrical sort of die-ins, you know, where they all lay on the ground with a tombstone on themselves. And also that group, there's that group of teenagers, young teenagers, Trans Kids Deserve Better. They scaled one of the government, like I think that department where we're going to be protesting, they once scaled it. So I'm sure they'll be at it. They'll be there. So it could be a noisy one. But the more of us can come out, the better. So that's on the 17th of December at 1 o'clock at the Department of Health and Social Care. That's on 39 Victoria Street. So I'll say that again. 17th of December, 1 o'clock at the Department of Health and Social Care, 39 Victoria Street in Westminster, in London. Okay. So that's going to get lively. Right. People, we got to the end. We made it through 1 hour and a half. And that's just me touching on the top lines. So I hope you found this informative, and I hope comprehensive. If you have any questions, then once the live stream is over, pop them in the comments under the video. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, of course, and share it around on social media so that we can, you know, get the word out as much as possible. It makes such a difference. Like we're in such a different position from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago. That's a really positive thing. So as depressing as it is that this trial is going ahead, I think it's going to go ahead. We just need to kick up as much of a stink about it all. And on social, use hashtag stop the trial in the comment under this video. Once it's done, just post stop the trial and let's get that trending. Let's get that out. It's nice and easy. Stop the trial. And let's wake up more of the general public about what's going on. And I'll hopefully see you on the 17th, because I'll definitely be at that one. Oh, thank you so much for your 10 euros. Yes. Now that's a very interesting username that you have. I can't even say it, because then again, the YouTube algorithms will get on my case. But thank you so much for your 10 euros. Let me know where in Europe you are. Are you a fellow Dutch person? Thank you. Siren songs, 200 kids will be sacrificial lambs. It might be much more than 200. That's just the start. That's the depressing thing. Kaz, even though she's not doing the trial, but she said earlier, oh, it could be unlimited. Which is so reassuring, isn't it? And Georgina says very early blocker interventions are designed to prevent desistance, future detransition, not to cure dysphoria. Yeah, I agree. We know this now. We know all of this. Mirjam de Graaf, een hele fijne avond en een goed weekend. And yeah, have a great weekend, everyone. And I'm going to work on a Boy George video that I've already recorded it last week, Thursday, but just haven't got around to editing it. So I'll do that. I'm going to prepare for my interview with the gay male detransitioner in Scotland. And sorry, I'm just checking. Taylor says it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 3 steps back. But anyways, we're all here now, and we're all so much better organized. So let's do this. Let's do this, and let's stop that trial. Okay? Have a very good weekend, everyone, and I shall see you in the next one. Where's that end button? Oh, it's right behind my mic, so I can't see what I'm pressing. Okie dokie. Have a good one. Thank you. And in the meantime, keep it real and keep smiling.